These are not students that were sitting around the student union or sitting around the dorm and said, hey, I just feel moved to get behind those murderers. Welcome back to Fill in the Blanks. I appreciate all of your emails, messages, and comments regarding last week's episode with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. These are important conversations to have, and in today's episodes, we're diving into a lot of current events unfolding, not just on current campuses, but there's obviously been a huge development regarding the Iranian president and a helicopter crash. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But you guys know that I'm very concerned about our most prestigious institutions that have been embroiled in protest led by allegedly pro-Hamas student organizations. I say allegedly student organizations because I believe that there are external activists and agitators that are involved, that are organizing and egging these situations on. We're going to talk about that. It's increasingly evident that there's a rising tide of animosity, not only toward Jews and the state of Israel, but also toward America and our culture, everything in the West and our core principles. Now, today, I have the privilege of speaking with Elika Laban, an attorney, artist, activist, and speaker. She was on the show recently, and I wanted so much to have more time to speak with her. So when we were finished, I said, I want to talk to you again soon. And I don't think she expected it this soon, but I just really was anxious to hear more about what she had to say. She shed so much light on critical human rights issues in Iran and the broader Middle East, really. So, Elika, thank you for doing this, and welcome to Fill in the Blanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk first about what has happened with this breaking news about the helicopter crash. What's your take on this?
So there were a few people in the helicopter crash. One of them was the president, Raisi, and then you had the foreign minister, Amir Abdullahian. This is actually a day of celebration for Iranians, even though people don't typically like that someone would celebrate death. I don't think that they have a lot of understanding about who this person is. He was known as the Butcher of Tehran. He worked as a prosecutor, starting his career at 20 years old, soon becoming the deputy prosecutor of Tehran at 25, working his way up to the ranks and becoming a chief justice, where he ordered the lynching of thousands and thousands and thousands of Iranians for opposing the regime. He was part of the 1988 death committee that executed anywhere between 5,000 and 30,000 Iranian dissidents. So there are no tears shed for him today. And in fact, there are fireworks all over Iran following this news.
Well, are they not afraid to celebrate openly? Are they not afraid of retribution?
Yes, they are. I mean, yes and no. They have deployed kind of all of the military tanks to try and suppress the uprisings. But as you know, as we've all been watching for the past few years, the Iranian people aren't afraid anymore. They are taking to the streets. They are protesting. They're ready to risk their lives for freedom, because this has been going on for 45 years. And it's reached a state where when you have nothing to live for, you have everything to die for. And that's where the Iranian people are right now.
And what will be the result of this? What will happen? Will there be repercussions for this?
Well, I mean, it depends, really. From what we know right now, the only thing we know is that this was an accident. It seems a little bit irresponsible that they've sent two of their most senior officials in a apparently old helicopter in the foggy mountains. They didn't invest in their protection and their safety. As far as we know right now, this is an accident. So what I do think is that it is going to kind of weaken morale for the regime. It's going to show that there's a lack of stability. That stability that they've always been portraying to the world is, in fact, a gimmick. And I think that it could lead to the this could be the beginning of the crumbling of the regime.
His replacement at this point is the first vice president, and that is expected to be who?
That I don't know yet. That I haven't heard.
Do we have any idea of those that are backing him up that will move into that position? Is it expected that these are hardliners, or is it expected that these are more moderates? Do we have any idea who's likely to step into that position?
I mean, whoever steps into that position will be a hardliner. You don't make your way to that position without being a hardliner, because you have to rule this country with an iron fist, because you're dealing with millions of people uprising against the regime all the time. And so softer, more moderate mullahs haven't done too well in those positions. So yeah, it likely will be a hardliner. But the reality is that, you know, he played the role of executive. You know, he in the system of government that's similar to ours in the sense that there's a executive, judiciary, and a parliament where we have Congress. So they have a system of government in that way. But above that system of government is the what's called the Velayat Faqih, which is the supreme leader, and the supreme leader is protected by the IRGC. Now, that's really the heart and soul of the regime. So this is this part of the system of government, one of the three branches of government underneath it. However, like I was saying, this symbolic display of instability is something that could essentially, the way that this regime collapses is if the IRGC begins defecting. And this show of instability is something that could cause the IRGC to reconsider their alliances and start defecting. And if that happens, that's going to be the revolution that will succeed in Iran.
Who was likely behind the missile attack on Israel a few weeks ago? Would that have come from him, or would that have come from the supreme leader? Who would have given that order?
No, it wouldn't have come from him. It would have come from the IRGC, which is above the government. But you know, they're all part of the same system.
And is there chaos around all of that right now?
There is a lot of chaos, but it's something that the regime is trying desperately to conceal. When the news broke at first, they were saying that nothing's happened, nothing's wrong, everyone's safe. They are really trying to show this kind of strong front. Even the supreme leader, who's been battling cancer, who's been sick for many, many years, you know, they say he's in perfect health. They really do not want to give this appearance to the world or to the country that they're falling apart, which is something that everybody knows at this point. And this is just the best evidence of the fact that they are falling apart.
It just doesn't make sense, because this was a 1960s helicopter from everything we can understand. And it was being flown in really bad weather conditions, apparently, over treacherous terrain. And with the president, it just doesn't seem very planful.
No, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because this is a regime that, you know, embezzles money from its country, which is obviously very rich in natural resources. The supreme leader is worth more than $100 billion. They have literally hundreds and billions of dollars, and they couldn't even invest in protecting their chief senior officials. And that is exactly what lends to the appearance of such instability, that they don't even have investment for the president and the foreign minister to take a helicopter ride in treacherous conditions, you know? And that's the thing, they have nothing to blame. They have nobody to blame but themselves for that. You know, you can easily try and pin this on somebody else, or that this was a setup, or this was an assassination. But, you know, knowing the conditions, that to me sounds very self-inflicted, and a very good sign of their lack of stability.
What effect do you think this will have on the war right now between Israel and Hamas?
I think obviously they're going to be distracted a little bit because of this. You know, it's really hard to say. I can imagine right now they are doing a lot to try and figure out how to pin this on Israel. Obviously, we don't know anything, so there's no point in trying to speculate. But I'm thinking that that's the first go-to, is that because, you know, they just took out another one of their senior commanders a couple of weeks ago. So And even when the USA killed Qasem Soleimani, they tried to blame that on Israel as well. So there's a good chance that they're going to look to blame Israel for this. And then maybe something will happen in terms of some repercussion or some, I don't know. In terms of the war between Israel and Hamas, I think what it's showing is that side, the Islamic Republic and their proxies that are responsible for this war, that side isn't winning. And not only is it not winning, but it's losing badly at this point.
This is really interesting. And I want to get into this so everybody knows you are an attorney. You're Iranian American and definitely an activist. You have really strong opinions that I want you to share with us about the Islamic Republic's propaganda in the West. You believe it is organized, you believe it is insidious, well strategized, and monumentally effective. You say it's a successful long game campaign. I'd like you to tell us what you mean by that. What do you think is going on, and how is it playing out in America right now?
So when I say that, we have to kind of start at the beginning in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran. And just as an aside, that revolution looked very much like some of the protests that we're seeing here today. It was anti-Western, anti-imperialist, anti-elitism, all of this kind of like Marxist Islamist ideologies, right? And that kind of galvanized people into believing that there was something better than what they had, which was the Shah of Iran at that time. Now, ever since the Islamic Republic's inception in 1979, they obviously began immediately slaughtering dissidents, anyone who disagreed with them, including my family. But what's really important about this is that this could not have gone on without a strategy to hide, to conceal what they were doing from the world. Okay, they could not have been transparent about the number of executions, the rate and extent of the terrorism. That simply wouldn't have worked. So over the past 45 years, this regime has become extremely adept at high-level manipulation. High-level manipulation, lies, concealment. And in harboring these tactics over the years, which Iranians have been fighting tooth and nail to show to Western governments, this is what is happening. Okay, they've been doing this in Iran, and they're trying to bring it over here to the West. And nobody paid attention until 45 years later, when every one of us is now seeing these effects in the streets of America. So they invested over time. Both the Islamic Republic, Qatar, other Middle Eastern countries started funneling this money into Western academic institutions. Not only do they funnel money into these academic institutions, but they actually have agents. They have agents working as professors in these institutions. And I'm not just speculating. When I say agents, I'm saying that there have been court cases where American courts have determined that these people are operating as undisclosed agents of the Islamic Republic. They are in the Pentagon, they are in Washington, they are in your academic institutions. And all of them are indoctrinating young people to believe this kind of, I call it terrorist inclusion ideology, which is this extreme, radical left-wing Marxist Islamist ideology. And so that has been taking place for a number of years. And that is exactly why on October 7th, you had not just students celebrating October 7th, but professors themselves. That's why you had them chanting, telling Jews to go back to Poland. I mean, this is unbelievable that this type of action has no consequence.
Let me unpack that for a minute, because I know what you're talking about. People can fact check this,
yes,
and I invite them to do that. We're talking as far back as the 90s, right? We're talking as far back as the 90s, where some of these individuals have been actually identified, arrested, and tried in federal court, some of them in Texas. They've been tried in federal court and sentenced to as much as 65 years in prison. Talk a little more about that, who we're talking about, what they were charged with, and how this went down.
Well, I was talking about, I'm not sure who specifically you're talking about, but what I was talking about was that so basically the regime has its lobby in Washington, and that lobby is NIAC, NIAC, NIAC is what they're called. There was a court case in 2008 where they were accused of being agents of the regime. They sued the person who made that accusation for defamation. They ended up in court, and the court subpoenaed the computers that NIAC was using and found 4,000 unreported exchanges between NIAC and the regime's foreign minister at that time, Javad Zarif. From that, the FBI determined that NIAC could be operating as an undeclared agent for the regime in violation of all these lobbying acts. Now, at that point, they were supposed to be under federal investigation. But what happens in 2009 is that Obama comes into power. And what Obama does, because he himself also had this desire to engage in diplomatic relations with the Islamic Republic, is that he actually appoints NIAC to be his advisor for Iran in the White House. What that led to is Obama getting into this nuclear deal with the regime, the JCPOA in 2015, where they unfreeze $150 billion, okay, $150 billion to this regime. Now, what's important is that at that exact moment, the people of Iran, they were engaged in a different revolution, which was called the Green Revolution, which looked just like this Women Life Freedom Revolution. And they were on the cusp of taking the regime out. But then Obama comes in, gives them $150 billion, being advised by their lobby here in the White House. And now, all of a sudden, the regime is empowered again, and the brutal crackdown of the protesters happens again, and the regime lives to see another day.
Define for the listeners and the viewers NIAC.
Well, I mean, that's basically they are a lobby. They're part of a think tank in Washington that supports the Islamic Republic. I can't say, as a matter of fact, what the relationship is to the extent that they are getting paid or not paid to do what they do, but their content is very much in line with the Islamic Republic's talking points. But it's presented, okay, so this is what's crucial. This is what's crucial. When some of those exchanges were revealed, one of the main strategies that came out of that was this determination that the Islamic Republic, through that lobby, NIAC, they were going to target the Western left. And they were going to target the Western left with this ideology of anti-war and anti-imperialism and Islamophobia. So the grand design of this plan was that anybody who would criticize the Islamic Republic would be accused of being Islamophobic, right? And that is how the left suppresses Iranians or just anybody from criticizing the Islamic Republic because of this term Islamophobia, right? The other thing that they did was that they planned to target Western leftists who have this kind of like anti-imperialism ideology and frame the Islamic Republic as being a victim of the West, right? A victim of Western imperialism. Now, when you ask any of these people, can you explain what you mean by Western imperialism in Iran? Not a single person will be able to give you a response because there's no such thing. There has been no Western imperialism in Iran for the past 45 years. The entire thing is a fabrication.
But that's what they're selling on both ends. That's what they're selling in America. That's what they're selling in Iran.
Correct. But the reason why the Iranian people, so this is another thing they do, especially the ultra-left Western media, they suppress the reality of what's happening in Iran. The Iranian people are against the regime. They will not show the protests that show how against the regime they are. They will not show that they're celebrating at the death of President Raisi. They won't show any of those things because they don't want the world to see that the Iranian people are against the regime, because they want to keep up this illusion that there's actually support for this, right? So yes, it's the same thing they're feeding inside Iran. It's the same thing that they're feeding in the West. And as I said, it has been tremendously successful.
All right, and how has this played out on the campuses? We've watched this, and you and I know the answer to that, but I want you to explain it as an Iranian American that has looked at this, because you said it's been disgusting what you've seen these American students do. Talk about that for our listeners, about what you're seeing and how it looks to you.
I mean, we can get into the way that the organizers are behind much of this and influencing and who they've been paid by and all of that. But just at a broader level, the things that we are seeing play directly into the regime's propaganda. When you hear these students chanting things like Hamas, Hamas, we love you, we support your rockets too, or burn Tel Aviv to the ground, all of these things are Islamic Republic propaganda. And what that comes from is teaching these students to believe that there is this false binary of oppressed and oppressor. And the ultimate evil is white supremacy, and everything that's not white supremacy is good. So the oppressed, being Hamas, which is what they tell them, right? The Hamas are the oppressed. They can do no wrong. They're freedom fighters. There are no red lines to what Hamas can do because they're oppressed people. Now, obviously, we know that this is not true. We know that Hamas leaders are billionaires. We know that what Hamas is working towards is not the freedom of the Palestinian people in occupied territories, but it is to destroy Israel, which is exactly what the Islamic Republic has publicly said is their goal, and exactly why they fund and train Hamas, for the purpose of annihilating Israel. However, the Islamic Republic's propaganda convinces these people that it has nothing to do with that these are oppressed freedom fighters who are fighting for the liberation of Palestinians in occupied territories, which is simply not true. And that is how you convince the Western left, who buy into this binary, that Hamas are just oppressed people that can do no wrong. That leads to them on these campuses chanting these, just unbelievable things and engaging in acts of very, very disturbing anti-Semitism, right? This is all rooted in this indoctrination that has been working up for the past several decades in the US.
But how is this happening? Let's think about this for a minute. We're talking about America. We're talking about elite universities where we supposedly have students that are intelligent. We supposedly have universities where we're teaching critical thinking. We are teaching geopolitical realities. We're teaching history. And we have clear evidence that there has been an invasion where they come across, and I was just there last week. I was in the kibbutz, a couple of them. I was at the Nova Festival site. I've seen the blood-splattered walls. I've seen the cribs. I've actually stood in the rooms where the bullet holes are in the doors of the safe rooms. I've seen these things with my own eyes. I've talked to the people that survived. I've talked to the families that were held hostage for 52 days and then released, but still have family members there. These were not military targets. These were soft target non-combatants. They came across the border and assassinated them, murdered them, beheaded them, cut off arms, legs, raped them, tortured them. And we have students that are celebrating these people for two reasons. One, because it was Jews that it was done to, which apparently makes it okay in their eyes. And two, because they believe that it's, quote, resistance. I can't even.
Yeah.
And look, I've studied brainwashing. I've studied psychological warfare. I don't even know how I would start selling that, and it has been bought lock, stock, and barrel. How is that possible?
Well, this process of indoctrination, which begins with dehumanizing Jews, okay, but they don't do it in that way that's so obvious to talk about Jews and call them Jews. And this is a pattern that we've seen every time that there was a mass kind of genocide or something like this, during the Holocaust or during slavery. It starts by the dehumanization of these are white supremacists, these are colonizers. You don't ever say Jews explicitly. You say these are Zionists, right? You find different terms. This is exactly what they did during the Holocaust. These are capitalists, these are communists. You never explicitly say Jews. Once you've laid the groundwork that this thing is the most evil thing in the world, right? Being a colonizer or a white supremacist or Zionist or whatever the word is, then you get consent from that person, right, to kill whoever it is that you've dehumanized. So once you've built that foundation, but these are colonizers, these are this, these are that, then it seems perfectly okay to slaughter whoever fits into that bracket because of the priming process that has just taken place. So that priming process, again, it's all Islamic Republic propaganda, and that's what people need to understand where this comes from. And then, yes, it comes to the US. And no, absolutely, they do not teach critical thinking in these schools. That is the last thing that they teach in these schools, because the professors of these schools are the people that went to these schools and were taught the same ideologies of, anti-imperialism and anti-Westernism, and this is all colonization and white supremacy. None of this comports with the actual facts of the history of the Levant. It's completely disingenuous. It's completely wrong. And so these students are being taught by the same people who are students of the same ideologies, all of the propaganda which comes from the Islamic Republic that has been priming for decades the dehumanization of Jews as colonizers. And this is exactly why people have no problem celebrating their murder or just denying that it didn't happen at all.
It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to get hundreds and hundreds of students on a campus to go out and live in tents and support something like this when a few months ago, they didn't even have the word Hamas in their vocabulary.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that they're living in tents because something that I've also been talking about is the way that the radical left have fetishized oppression as a byproduct of this oppressor-oppressed binary, which I've been talking to you about, right? So the oppressors are the all evil white supremacists in the world, and the oppressed are people of color. Now it's this iteration, it's Middle Eastern Muslim people, right? The places that I'm from. They fetishize that. Being oppressed is now glamorous. Everybody wants to be oppressed. So what we're actually seeing is a lot of these people are remaking or reliving the situation of oppression that they're seeing in Gaza. Why are they intense? When in ever of all time have you seen protests where people are in these tents that literally look like the same tents as Rafah? Why is it that these students are telling the cameras, we're asking for basic humanitarian aid? A term that's just used for when situations of war and famine. That isn't a term that you use for people that are hungry. It's this glamorization of oppression where they're actually trying to recreate being oppressed because they've been taught to fetishize it so much.
That's interesting that we've got these Ivy League students that are standing out there in these designer clothes on the steps of the library, and they're identifying themselves with Gazans who are living on 245 calories a day because Hamas is stealing whatever aid is coming in.
Yep.
But yet they're relating to them, they're identifying themselves as those people. That doesn't seem to fit in your ear very well.
Well, and that's exactly what they're trying to do, is they're trying to shirk their privilege because they've been taught, this is society kind of operates in pendulum swings, right? At one time, it was great to be privileged and wealthy and elite. And the pendulum kind of swung where it was supposed to go in the direction of let's kind of be a little bit more considerate of people who don't live under these circumstances. Instead, it went all the way in the opposite direction, as it does, right? Where it's now just the worst thing in the world to have any semblance of privilege, to be able to eat, to be able to afford rent, you know? So they are desperate to shirk any semblance of privilege that they have because they have been taught that privilege is a bad thing. And the sad, painful reality of this is that people in Gaza, people in Iran, people in Syria, people in Sudan would give their lives for just a scintilla of the privilege that they have. And they are so ashamed of it. They are so ashamed of it.
Yeah, I really wonder what would happen if they walked off that campus and walked into Gaza.
No, anybody on the ground, if they lived one day on the ground in the Middle East, they absolutely wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing right now. Their tune would change dramatically. But as I told you, I think I told you on the show, I'm not sure that I did. You cannot break America from the outside. The only way to take America down is from the inside. And this is the long game that the Islamic Republic have been playing for a long time. And this is the exact manifestation of that long game in becoming successful. This is exactly what it looks like when America starts to crack from within, which is exactly what makes it vulnerable to foreign predators. And if people don't wake up now, I don't know what anybody needs to see, what else anybody needs to see to wake up.
So what do we do with this? I mean, as Americans, you and I talking about it, you and I raising the flag, what needs to happen to turn this around?
I think people need to wake up. And I don't know what it is that's going to cause people to wake up. I don't want it to have to be the extreme, which is that there's a terrorist attack in the country or something that makes people wake up. And I don't have the answer. I don't know what it's going to take for people to wake up, because everything that I've seen to me is enough to wake up the entire nation. And if it hasn't, I don't know what else it's going to take.
I never thought in my lifetime I would hear the anti-Semitic sort of things that I'm hearing now. When I'm hearing these chants of death to Israel, death to America, all of these anti-Semitic slurs about Jews, and seeing these students praying. There were these students praying at the University of Texas. Is it the namaz? Mm-hmm. They don't even know what. I've tried to talk to some of these students on the UCLA campus. They don't even know enough about what they're doing to answer a fundamental basic question about why they're out there.
No, they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They have no familiarity with the religion, the culture. They don't, even the things that they're wearing. They're like, appropriating Middle Eastern dress. They don't know what it means. They don't know why they're wearing it. They actually don't know anything about what they're doing. And this is exactly what indoctrination looks like,
No, they have no idea. And when you see who's leading the activities, they're 8-10 years older than the actual students. Mm-hmm. We were there when they took down the encampment on the UCLA campus. Mm-hmm. About 3:30 in the morning, and we went in with the police and the LA County Sheriff's Office. It was interesting when we were talking to the sheriff's department, the kind of SWAT units that were going in to take them down. I asked them, what's your thinking? What's your priority at this point? And they said, our number one priority is the safety of the protesters, and what happens will be determined by them. If we go in and say, okay, it's time to leave, although they had numerous demands to leave that they had ignored, they said, we will still give them another chance to leave. And if they do, we'll just open a path for them and let them walk out. Some of them insist on being arrested. And if they do, we'll put restraints on them and put them on the bus and take them down and book them on a misdemeanor. But our number one concern is their safety. If they resist or they try to fight in some way, then they choose that. We don't want to do that. We're going to try to keep them safe. But they're telling us there are some older agitators there who aren't students, and they will try to get them to rush us and try to create a scene so they can have more drama. And we don't want that. We don't want to tase anybody. We don't want to spray anybody. We don't want to have to take anybody down. But there are outside people that are exploiting these kids. They don't know what they're doing, but they're going to try to get them to do that because they're trying to create problems.
I agree. And I think that a lot of this goes also to the culture of impunity within the schools themselves. There are no consequences for these actions. There's no consequences for this anti-Semitism. There are no consequences from ostracizing Jewish students or not allowing them on the campus. What is the consequence? When you hear them say things like go back to Poland or, whatever chants that they say to Jews, this would be completely unacceptable for any other ethnicity, right? If you've said it to anybody from the Middle East or Africa, go back to Africa, go back to Iraq, go back to Syria, go back to Lebanon, those would be grounds to be expelled immediately. It would be, talked about everywhere. And yet there's such impunity for this blatant anti-Semitism to tell Jews to go back to Poland, right? Which is harrowing, because you're talking about the very sensitive matter. You're talking about the Holocaust, right? Why do these schools facilitate such a hostile environment? Why do they not have any consequences for such bigotry, racism, hostility? When you ask that question, right, when that's lacking, is it really a surprise that we're seeing what we're seeing on the campuses? Because it's the schools themselves that apply this culture of impunity that has led to what we're seeing now.
You made a comment when we talked earlier that they've spent many years making these kids feel guilty for being white and having privilege. So now there's like, okay, we can balance the scales now by identifying with the oppressed. And if we can be surrogates for them, if we can stand in for them, then wow, we've done something where we can shirk this identity.
Well, I don't know that it's as I think it's giving them a bit too much credit to say that they're trying to settle the score in some way or balance this out. What I think is that they're shirking their identity as privileged. And then the next thing is that, okay, once you've shirked your identity, which identity will you assume? And the identity that you assume is a favorable identity, an identity that is going to have you receive praise, that's going to make you seem whatever it is that gets your social validation, right? And the current identity to get social validation from is to be an oppressed person. And so that's why they step into the shoes of whoever or whatever looks like it is oppressed. And right now it's the Middle East. So they've shirked their old identity. They need to assume a new identity. That identity needs to be that of someone who is oppressed. And so they assume the identities and kind of replicate these scenes from the Middle East.
Who's funding this? There
are a lot of things being said now that Muslim Brotherhood is funding the SJP, Students for Justice of Palestine. I can't confirm any of this, but to be clear, if people don't know, Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So when Hamas was created in 1987, that was after the Muslim Brothers' tenure since the beginning of this kind of conflict around the British Mandate time, which kind of teamed up with the Islamic Republic to create Hamas. So let's just say that the Muslim Brotherhood is the predecessor. And what I have heard, which I can't confirm, is that the Muslim Brotherhood has funded some of these organizers on campus.
Well, we followed the money on this pretty carefully. We've seen Rockefeller Brothers, George Soros, Westpac. We've seen a number of big money donors that funnel this down, and it does get to SJP and some of these other groups. They actually do have people on the payroll that are moving from campus to campus to campus, and they're kind of going in with an orientation pack, and it's like, these are the things we're going to push, these are the things that we need to accomplish. And we notice that a lot of the placards and signs that you see, the font is exactly the same. The helmets are the same. Even the tents start showing some repetition. Maybe that's because those are the only tents available to buy at Walmart or Target or Costco or whatever. I don't know, but there's a lot of similarities from one campus to another, all the way from California to upstate New York.
Yeah, and it's another aspect of this is that those of us who are talking about this, it's not only so organized at this level, it's not only so funded at this level, but there's an additional level where anybody who talks about this, right, their voices have to be suppressed so that this doesn't come out. And I've noticed this so many times. Whenever I speak about this, I will be very clear about drawing a distinction. I will be very, very clearly state, there are many people who are protesting for genuine reasons, but there are a minority of people who are, celebrating terrorism, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazis, being funded, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter how much I draw the distinction. The general public's response is that you're trying to demonize peaceful protests and you support genocide. So there's actually more layers to this. It's not just that, this is being funded and there's an alternative motive. It's that there is some level of indoctrination that is being applied to the masses, where we can't even talk about this without being attacked left, right, and center. That is what you call sweeping indoctrination. And that's the thing that really scares me. It is the lack of critical thinking. It's the way that you can say just the most common sense thing, and the response from the general public is so prickly, so uninterested in hearing it, that makes me feel I don't even know if we're close. I don't even know if we're close to people waking up to this at this point.
Well, is it the general public or is it the loud fringe? I wonder, there's that 70% in the middle that doesn't say anything. And then there's that 5 or 10% on the fringe that has a megaphone and yells really loud. And then there are the bot farms on the social media platforms that get on and create what appears to be an organic zeitgeist, when in fact it isn't a zeitgeist at all. When I talk to large groups, and I've probably talked to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10,000 in the last week of middle Americans, they don't feel that way at all. They are as appalled as we are at what's happening at the universities. They are as appalled about the anti-Semitism, the support of these terrorists, and as concerned about them being on American soil and influencing our young people as they can possibly be. But yet that doesn't get coverage. That doesn't get press at all.
There's a chance that the 70% are seeing it. I wouldn't say that I think the 70% know the extent of what's going on, although they might be seeing it. The other part of what we have to kind of confront is the reality of algorithms and echo chambers. So when I say that, what I mean is that I often get responses from people who are in that 5% or whatever percent you want to say that it is that kind of supports this. And they genuinely say that they've never seen anything like this whatsoever, right? They've never seen any display of anti-Semitism. They've never seen any support for terrorism. And that's another reality that we're having to confront in the age of technology, right? People build their own echo chambers, and the people in that echo chamber are convinced that we are just making this up. They haven't ever even seen it. And so you can't even get through to them because they don't even have access. They've designed their algorithm so they don't even have access to the things that we're seeing. That's another thing that really, really reinforces their indoctrination, is that they're never being kind of hit with these flashes of truth because they've shielded themselves away from it completely. And this is something that's going to be very interesting and scary to see over time, is what will be the result of these manufactured echo chambers where radicals and extremists just keep getting more extreme because they never see the truth that the rest of us are seeing.
Yeah, that's the problem. If you can't get through those barriers and get people to say, look, you don't have to agree, you just need to consider this. And that's why we did the follow the money exercise, where we showed that these are not organic demonstrations. These are not students that were sitting around the student union or sitting around the dorm and said, hey, you know what? I really feel the need to support these terrorists that came across the border out of the Gaza Strip and attacked these women, children, elderly in their homes. I just feel moved to get behind those murderers. That's not it. We've got these organizers coming in, and we have a disenfranchised youth. We've got these Gen Zers that are sitting around. They don't have a sense of belonging. They got the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness since we've been keeping records. Everybody's number one need is acceptance and belongingness. And here they come along and say, have I got a cause for you? Have I got something that you can really get behind? And it's very cutting edge. It's very avant-garde. You're going to be really sticking up for all of these people that are trapped. They've come and taken their land, and we're going to stand up for them. Mm-hmm. I think it just appeals to them. And they don't, as you said, they don't have critical thinking. They don't ask the hard questions. All of a sudden, they're out there and they've got this scarf on, and boy, they just feel like they're on the moral high ground. And it's shocking.
Well, it is. And you know, there's kind of like a perfect storm of two things colliding. Number one is the guilt for being privileged or elite or white or all of the above, mixed in with the infiltration, right? Because if you think about it, if this was just about standing up for oppressed people, why wouldn't they be protesting for Iran? Why wouldn't they be protesting for Syria? Why wouldn't they be protesting for Darfur, you know, which is the biggest genocide taking place in the world right now? The reason that they can't be protesting for those things, because it doesn't tap into that guilt, right? Because there's no white supremacy or white anything involved in those stories. So there has to be that perfect storm of, hey, don't you feel so guilty for being privileged? Don't you feel so guilty for being white, right? Which is an indoctrination process that's been happening over time. Here's how you can, what I call guilt laundering, right? Here's how you can launder your guilt through the Middle East by standing up for these oppressed people who you've been ignoring and putting down and calling terrorists for so many years. They're not terrorists, they're just oppressed people. And you can finally launder that guilt of yours by standing up for these oppressed people. And that's the perfect storm to motivate them to go out there. But they absolutely won't go out there for any other oppressed people when there isn't any of that, something that they can brand as white supremacy.
Well, I think all we can do is continue to beat the drum. And I can tell you from sitting down with Prime Minister Netanyahu that he is singular in purpose. I look that man in the eye and I can tell you he intends to wipe out Hamas. He is not going to stop until that is done. He fully believes if he stops one battalion short of wiping out Hamas, that the noose around Israel will tighten. And he understands there's Hezbollah, he understands there's the Houthis, he understands there's a lot left to do, but he believes that if he doesn't eliminate Hamas and get some kind of provisional government in place in Palestine, that it can be really bad for Israel. So he is 100% committed to finishing that. And at the time I talked to him, he said there were like 3 out of 21 battalions left, and they were in Rafah. And while I was still there, I could hear the bombs going off in Rafah. The leaders, of course, are in Qatar. They're not there. They're in 7-star hotels over in Qatar, living off all the money for what they've stolen from the Gazans. But I can tell you he's not going to stop until they've taken down every Hamas terrorist, collapsed every tunnel, at least the ones that they can find, and they're all interconnected. I think he believes if Iran keeps coming up with these different proxies, it's eventually going to involve them. Hopefully that won't happen, and maybe events of the last few days will create enough distraction that he can get something done and get a foothold. But I think all we can do is just keep educating people as to what's happening here. And I really wonder if these universities are going to penalize these students that have illegally assembled and intimidated, assaulted, incited others to violence against the Jews on their campus. Are they going to suspend them, expel them, take away their credits for at least a quarter, something, have some consequence?
Yeah. And that's what we're going to have to just keep educating the public on. It's one thing for them to get the consequences, but when the public, or well, I shouldn't say the public, the small percentage of people don't really understand why there's consequences, don't really understand why they're being punished, it's good, but it's not optimal. So what we want to do is kind of keep re-educating the public with, the humanitarian aspect of this, the fact that this type of bigotry is absolutely never acceptable, no matter whether a person is white or not white, right? Because that's always been the issue with them, and because they've framed Jews as white people, they think it's acceptable. They think anti-Semitism is acceptable when it's just simply not. So yeah, our task is going to be education from now going forward.
Well, consider me on the team. And if there's anything I can do to help you as you do this, or if there's anything that you have that needs to be spread, we need to stay in touch, and let's continue to beat this drum until we get it out there.
Absolutely. We absolutely will stay in touch. This is going to be a concerted effort. This cannot be done by one or two of us. We have to make sure that we are, all collaborating to keep this education and, as you said, beating this drum going.
Well, there is a team of us. We will stay connected, and if there's anything that you've got that needs dissemination, you get it to me and I will make sure it gets out, and I will do the same thing. And I appreciate you talking to me today. Let's stay the course and just not give up the fight until we get the word out there, because I think the worm is beginning to turn. I really do.
I think so. We just have to keep being consistent with the same message, because you know what? There's no ideological inconsistencies with anything that we say. The reason that some of these more kind of ultra radical left-wing media now has to hide the fact that the Iranians inside Iran are opposing the regime is because when they're confronted with the fact that Iranians don't like the regime, and they're confronted with the fact that this regime isn't a good thing, by extension, they have to say, well, maybe their proxies are terrorists too. So they've gotten themselves into a bind where they cannot get a clear ideological consistency going on. They fall short because what they're saying is just simply not true. Whereas there's no ideological inconsistencies in any of the things that we've been saying. It is moral clarity, it is moral consistency, and it is ideological consistency. And that's the course that we have to stay.
Well, you explain it very well and very clearly. So let's keep talking about it and stay in touch.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. So long. Bye.